Come and find me, boy. Come and find me, boy.
All right. Well, we are back at Wichita Startup Week. Are we good? We're good. Okay. Are we good? We need our. We're good. Check. Okay, there we go. So sorry about that. Those post-lunch bugs. So thanks for you guys joining in the room, and thanks to everybody online watching. I'm James Williams, co-founder, Wichita Startup Week. Welcome to day 3, the 1 p.m. session. So you raise money, now what? Wichita Startup Week is powered by Koch Industries. We think that now is the time to realize and celebrate our entrepreneurial opportunities. It's an entirely volunteer-led effort in partnership with Techstars, a worldwide network to help entrepreneurs succeed. Before we get started, I want to thank a few of our sponsors. Koch Industries is our presenting sponsor. EY sponsored our hackathon. Cox Business for sponsoring our pitch competition. Fidelity Bank and Martin Pringle for sponsoring our tracks. Voltage and Emprise Bank for powering our trade show, and many, many more. This session is actually part of the Martin Pringle track, pre-revenue track. So Martin Pringle is a regional law firm here in Wichita with headquarters also in Kansas City. Our office is in Kansas City. They started in 1951 and they specialize in all kinds of great practices. They've gotten a lot of great shout outs already this week about how they've helped other entrepreneurs succeed, which I think is really cool. That being said, I wanted to introduce everybody to Ohler, or Sascha, excuse me, Sascha Ohler. We're just really, really fortunate to have him in town for today. Sascha is the Vice President of Research and Development and leads at New Analytics, where he leads R&D team consisting of product strategy, product engineering, and architecture. He's also the current board chair of Flagship Kansas, a nonprofit focused on assisting tech firms across Kansas through awareness, workforce development, and educational resources. He brings deep knowledge of enterprise software development, product management, and partner development to New Analytics. Prior to joining that, he held leadership positions across a range of industries, including GovTech, IT, financial services, and enterprise software. Most recently, he led the R&D teams at Civic Plus, a private equity-backed GovTech company headquartered in Manhattan, Kansas. Help me welcome Sascha. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, welcome, and thank you for spending your after lunch hour with me. I hope nobody is going to doze off here. So I hope you included a little bit of caffeine in your lunch routine today. But awesome event so far. I want a big shout out to James and Chris and the rest of the team for really putting this on, making this become a reality. And I think this is the first of many great events like this here in Wichita. I'm really excited to be part of this. We'll be spending the next 45 minutes or so just talking a little bit about kind of the do's and don'ts of, so you raised some funds, so what are you going to do now, right? And what I would like to do before we get started, I would love for you guys to just let me know a little bit about yourself. So I would love to know who in here is either a current founder or aspiring founder of a business. Okay, awesome. Who here is on the venture or PE side of the house? Anybody? Okay. Very good. Who is here to just kind of pick everybody's brain and see if this might be maybe something that you want to do? Awesome, awesome. So, as James so kindly did, he introduced me. I'm at New Analytics, the executive VP there, and I'm also the current board chair for Flagship Kansas, which if you're not familiar with Flagship Kansas, I would very much encourage you to go to flagshipkansas.tech and check us out. We're a tech council for the state, and really our main mission is to support tech employers and tech employees across Kansas and really build community here. And Ashley Scheidemann, who's our executive director, is in attendance as well. So awesome. So let's get started here. Maybe. Here we go. So German by birth, Kansan by choice. So in case at some point you have a difficulty understanding me, it's because my German accent is coming through. Just FYI. I have been in Kansas now for 22 years, 18 years of those in Kansas City, and about 5 now in Manhattan. And we love it in Manhattan. It's home. And I've been in tech for almost the entire time that I've been here in the States. Last 10 years in executive leadership in a variety of different organizations, mainly in the fintech sector and GovTech sector. It's kind of been my main background. In a workshop that Chris led here earlier, we were talking a little bit about kind of, what is everybody's background. And I have to confess, I'm not an entrepreneur. I have never started a business, right? I have been an intrapreneur for about 15 years. I have started a lot of new divisions within organizations, new product lines, new markets, stuff like that. And that's kind of my background there. As part of that, I've been part of 3 funding rounds and about 20 buy-side transactions. So the majority of those came with both Perceptive Software / Lexmark back in Kansas City, and then in my role as the head of R&D at Civic Plus, we made 7 acquisitions there during my tenure there. So just a little bit about that. So I wanted to dive in here. What's the number one reason why most startups fail? Now, Chris had a very similar slide, but it was in different order. So I don't know if mine is right or his is right. We're probably both right. But the vast majority of startups that fail because they run out of cash. And I would venture to say out of that list of 12, the other 11 are a lot of the reasons why they run out of cash, right? They have misaligned teams. They don't have a product market fit established yet. They get outcompeted. They have a flawed business model, and so forth, right? So that's generally what happens there. But I would state it maybe this way, that more money without better decision-making is still not enough money, right? So Dave Ramsey always uses this phrase. He says, you can't out-earn stupid, right? And you can't outrace stupid either, right? So you have to, as a startup, you have to make smart decisions. And that's really what we're going to be talking about here today. So the next several slides that I have here will really be talking through, I have a few slides about the do's and then a few slides about the don'ts of what to do with that capital that you just raised. And I want to say this up front. So this is not just based on my experience. This has been based on experience of several really awesome founders and entrepreneurs that I've had the opportunity to work with over the years. I actually, in preparation for this, I interviewed a bunch of them and said, hey, if you could go back in time and make different decisions, what would those be, right? And so you'll see some of them actually quoted on various slides here as well. So, but yeah, let's dive in here. So actually, let me imagine you didn't see the last slide here. So let me ask you this. Hypothetically speaking, right? So you just went out, you secured a round of funding. What would be the first thing you were to go and do? Just shout it out. No reason to be polite.
Higher sales.
Sales? Okay.
I'm biased. I'd use it for marketing.
Okay. Use it for marketing. I assume you have a marketing background? Okay. Anything? Hire engineers. So grow the team. Okay. So as you will see, there's some overlap in what I will present here as my top 3. They're by no means the only top 3. You could probably find 1,000 other things that you could put on these slides. But I would tell you to pay yourself and your team fairly, because you've probably not done that. We'll talk about the let go. The let go is really kind of in line with hire a team, right? Kind of grow your team, find better people, right? And then invest in your practices. And so we're going to kind of step through that one by one. So pay yourself. As my friend Toby Rush likes to say, this is not a hobby, this is your job, right? And so compensate yourself, right? Chances are that to get to this point where you actually secured funding, you have cut a lot of corners for yourself personally. You've put in a lot of long hours, you've done without a salary or a minimal salary, right? A minimally viable salary, as Chris would probably say. You have had to do without a lot of things. And so now is the time to kind of take a little bit of that stress relief and actually pull a salary for yourself. Chances are also, because that's generally what happens when you start a business, right? You kind of get this group of people around you that are equally fanatical about what it is that you do, and therefore also willing to do a bunch of work for not a lot of money, right? Now is a great time to reward them for what they've actually done, because they were the ones that got you there, right? So I think that's a really important thing. When I was at Pramada, which was a 7-year-old startup, originally founded in Minneapolis and then moved out to the Bay Area, and we had kind of been bootstrapping the business for 7 years. This was a company that started out in the legal tech world, so they did contracts management, all sorts of stuff there. We were finally at a point where we were willing to go out and secure our Series A round. And we did so with Volition Capital out of Boston. And when we did that, that was kind of a big, kind of just load off our shoulders. So that kind of happened because all of a sudden, we had the ability to pay our team what we should have paid them all along. We had the ability to kind of step off the gas a little bit as far as that's concerned, right? And that was really, really important. I think the other part of that is too, and this is not just for startups when you secure your first round of funding. It's just in general a really good business practice is you gotta learn how to celebrate your wins. Very, very few businesses are really good at that, okay? Most of us, we're really good at running from one project that's complete, right? We check the box and we run to the next project and we try to get that completed. But we don't take that breather in between to actually say, hey, little pat on the back. We actually did something really, really cool here, right? And celebrate that. Again, that's part of this paying yourself and your team fairly. You had a...
Yeah, I was just going to say, from my experience, I've also seen that things are going well. You need to take care of yourself because you're going to have to carry your company on your back again at some point.
Yeah.
You need to not have all your resources gone.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too, right? We all have heard that phrase, right? It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? And for those of us who have maybe run a marathon, we know how much that takes out of your body. And so you need to also use the times when you can to just kind of slow down and recharge the batteries a little bit. So because the next marathon is most likely just around the corner, right? So that's, very, very good point there. Just making sure I don't miss anything. But yeah, I think the big thing there is really for me, pay yourself and your team fairly, and then really make sure that you really incorporate this celebrating your wins into your DNA as an organization, right? I think that's really, really important. So second one is let go. Bruce Wang is a guy that I first got to know in 2012, 2013, he was the CTO of an organization called Twistitch, startup out of the San Francisco Bay Area that when I was at Lexmark, we acquired the business. They were an API management platform that they had built, and we bought them to incorporate into our tech stack. He always likes to say this, if you're the best at every single job, it's probably time to upgrade, right? And I think that's another thing of this kind of letting go, right? The chances are, if you're the founder of a business, you are the CEO and the chief bottle washer, right? And you have your fingers in everything, and really more importantly, more critically, you have your head in everything. You think about everything all the time, right? How do we do sales better? How do we do marketing better? How do we get the product to where it needs to be? How do we hire more engineers? Right? You're thinking about all of these things. And in order for you to scale to that next level, which you now have the ability to because you got funding and you got capital in, right? Is you need to let go of things. And you need to hire people in who are actually really, really good at certain aspects of your business, right? Which also means that you as the founder need to really have a good look at the mirror and kind of say, what is it that I am really, really good at, right? Because you probably started the business because you're really exceptionally good at something, right? But you're most likely not exceptionally good at everything. So what is it that you are most passionate about? What is it that you are most excited about? And then really that's what you focus in on. And for the rest, you bring really good talent alongside you, right? Sorry.
Yeah, you talk about activist investors. Basically, you get funding. You're actually not an employee of them, but they have control of a lot of things. So can you talk about that? How to deal with it, how to let go, or even how to avoid?
Yeah, so I tell you, our last two funding rounds, the Series A was Promata, and then our initial funding round for minority investment at Civic Plus, we very specifically stayed away from investors out west. Okay? That was a conscious decision we made. And the reason for that was not because they didn't knock on our door. I mean, there were more people calling us every week than we wanted to answer the phones for. But there's something unique about companies that start in this part of the country, right? And there are some things that are really awesome about that, and there are some things that are kind of not so awesome about that, right? The things that are awesome is that we have this kind of just understated culture here, right? We don't talk a whole lot about ourselves. We just go and get the job done, right? It's kind of this like work hard, make your way, kind of figure it out attitude, right? The flip side of that is we don't talk a whole lot about ourselves, right? We're not that like flashy San Francisco company that just kind of shouts from the mountaintop how cool we are and how awesome we are and how we're going to change the world forever for the better and whatever, right? And so when you have a company like this, you want to align with investors that have the same kind of attitude, that have the same kind of mindset, right? And I think what you get a lot of times, especially when you look at some of the hotspots, right, like San Francisco, Austin, now more and more, other areas, you get a lot of investors that are the braha kind of investors, right? They just want to come in, they want to tell you exactly how it's done because they flip to their playbook section 4, on page 17, and now we're going to execute this because it's worked the last 3 times, right, kind of thing. And you really need to find investors that are more willing to truly partner with you, right, in this. And, we're going to talk a little bit about in this let go section here too, that really that is a great time to see whether the investor you have chosen is truly the partner that they say they would be and that you hoped they would be, or if they're just going to look at you as another way to take their blueprint and overlay it over your business and just kind of run it through the assembly line, right? So I would say choose very wisely. And for example, what we did at Promata, I think we interviewed about 24 investors, potential investors. Several of them who had not put a bid in for our business, but we just kind of reached out and we said, hey, from what we're hearing in the market, you're kind of the type of investor that we're looking for, right? would you mind giving us a couple of names of companies that you have invested in that we can talk to, right? And so really do your due diligence there the same way you would in other aspects of your business to really make sure you end up with somebody who's not just gonna run you, right? So I think that's really important. Another couple of points that I wanted to point out here is one, especially when you're taking your first funding, there's sometimes this mentality or this thought that you need to just find the best possible salesperson out there, find the best possible product person, find the best possible whatever person right out there and hire them. At that stage in your business, most likely you still don't need operators. You need people who can build things, right? Who can build structure, who can build teams, who can help you think through stuff critically. Right? So just because somebody has been really, really awesome at selling into the space that you're selling into or you're hoping to sell into, that doesn't make them the greatest salesperson to come on board as your CRO, right? You want somebody who is able to look at what you're doing and help you build your sales methodology, select the tools, select the team, hone the process, right? Experiment, right? So somebody who, again, you don't want the guy or gal who walks in with the playbook and says, well, we're going to go to page 23 and this is what we're going to do, right? Because it worked the last 4 companies I was at. Because chances are your business is different, right? And there's also this oftentimes this dissonance, right? So because you have built a certain culture, you have built a certain way of how you run the business, the way you approach the market, the way you serve your clients, right? That needs to match up with the processes you're building, right? You can't just do a copy-paste, right? Now, you can do a copy-paste on a lot of the frameworks and the conceptual piece of that, but then you need to figure out, how do I hone that into that fits my company, right? That fits my team. And so you need people that are flexible enough to actually be able to do that. And that is something, too, the other point there is, that is not something that just ends once you have the funding in, right? So your team composition will change at every inflection point throughout your business, which also means, and this is why I called that let go, not hire your team, right? Is you need to hold things really loosely, right? Meaning you also need to hold the people that you've hired loosely, right? Because there will be people that get you from A to B that will not in a million years get you from B to C. They just won't. It's not that they're not great people, right? They're just not the right people for that section of the journey, right? And so you need to be willing to kind of look at all of your structure and your composition of the team as kind of an ongoing thing that you always evaluate, right? And then obviously execute that in a very human, loving, kind way, right? But I think that's just something that's really important too. This is probably one of my favorite quotes, and if you've worked on any team or any project with me ever, you've heard me say this. General Stanley McChrystal is a guy that I follow a lot. He has his own consulting business now and does a lot of really, really, really cool work. But this is something that he came up with when he was commanding officer of the Afghan theater and was leading the entire Special Forces Command globally. And so he would always drill this in the minds of people, right? Slow is smooth, smooth is fast, right? And so again, it's really kind of a reminder for us, like, you gotta work. Now you have the resources, right? Now work on your practices, refine them, hone them, right? Get them to the point where you really, really, truly understand them. You'll hear from a lot of folks that they will say, well, now's the time you need to double the team, right? Bigger office, right? Spend for marketing, spend for sales, spend for, right, whatever, right? Don't invest a bunch of money in sales and marketing if you haven't figured out what it actually is that you're trying to do, right? That's just throwing money away, right? Hone your practices, really understand your market, really understand how to position, how to message before you spend $150,000 on an ad campaign, right? Or a rebrand, or whatever else it is that your investors tell you that you should be doing right now, right? So I think that's, again, it's really important, right? So chances are that you will feel like, okay, I've had very little resources. Now I have a bunch of resources, so I can attack everything. But really take the time to think through all of the different core processes of your business. Think about how you budget. Think about how you recruit. Think about sales. Think about marketing. Think about product, right? What is the methodology that you're using for your product management teams, right? Is it lean startup? Is it jobs to be done? Is it, whatever, right? Like figure out what works best for what you're trying to achieve. And then once you've figured it out, then step on the gas, right? So I think the slow, smooth, moves fast approach, right? So anytime that you spend strengthening your processes and strengthening your structures and strengthening your practices, when it gets time to step on the gas, that's when that will pay off greatly. Because you will not just kind of, skid along the road going really fast. You will actually have a very straight line to where you want to go next, which is really important there. And again, I think, the other thing too, kind of going back to the let go part earlier, is you got to remember with all of this, also with your practices, also with your processes inside the organization, you are not building for eternity. You're building for the current phase or the next phase, right? And then you're building for the next phase, right? But don't feel like you got to figure everything out between now and when you sell the business, right? Just figure it out between now and the next mile marker, right? Otherwise, again, you're going to spend money in places that you just shouldn't, or in ways that you shouldn't. So, and any questions so far? Comments? You want me to stop talking? Okay, good. So let's move on to the don'ts. Again, you could probably find another dozen or so to put on the slide. These are the top 3 that I picked, okay? You can critique them later. But the 3 that I would say is scale prematurely, get complacent, and be wasteful. And in many ways, they're a bit of an inflection of what the do's were earlier, right? It's kind of the hey, don't do this kind of thing, right? Scale prematurely. So chances are you think, got a bunch of money, my product or service is the best thing since sliced bread, so now let's just step on the gas, right? Well, maybe not, right? Maybe you just need to, right now, be thinking about doing a bunch of experimentation, right? Figure a bunch of things out. Sit down with a bunch of people and say, hey, so we made it this far. We clearly think that we have an idea here that's working because actually somebody was willing to write a check for it, right? But help us shoot holes in it. Help us figure out, is there something that's an opportunity right now for us to pivot into maybe an adjacent market? Is there an opportunity for us to potentially look at our service, apply it to a different industry, right? So experiment around. Don't feel like, okay, you just have this pile of cash, so now you need to burn through it as quickly as you can. Again, one of the reasons why we generally stayed away from West Coast companies. Because one of the things that they love to do is they write you a check in order to write you a bigger check, in order to write you an even bigger check, right? And they really want to see you burn through that cash as quickly as you possibly can. Well, sometimes that's the right thing to do. If you have really figured out product market fit, and you got your messaging down, and you get your pricing down, and you have your infrastructure built, and your product is awesome, then by all means, step on that gas, right? But chances are you haven't figured out at least aspects of that. So now is a good time. You have additional resources, experiment, right? So I think another thing to think about here is again, you will hear a lot of people say, double your team or hire aggressively in sales or spend aggressively on marketing or whatever, right? But you have to use this time to really figure out all of those underlying processes and all of these practices, right? And get them figured out, because otherwise, hiring more people will not return any results for you. In fact, it can actually go the other direction and will most likely go the other direction. I've been part of companies like that too, where, great year, and this goes not just for startups that were just funny, right? This goes for regular businesses as well that just had an awesome year, right? You have all this money, you think you're on the top of the world, right? You can do anything you want to, and now you start hiring like crazy, but you haven't really invested in how do you onboard people? How do you maintain the culture that you have built? How do you, indoctrinate, so to speak, people into the way that you like to run business, right? And so now all of a sudden you just have 50 more salespeople that also have no idea how the sales process works, in addition to the 20 you already had, right? So it's not helpful in that regard. So again, spend more time. And again, if you talk to any of the folks that have been on my teams over the last 10 years, one thing that they will all tell you is that I put a lot of time on my calendar on a weekly basis that's just blocked off to think. Because many years ago, a manager came to me, one of my managers at the time came to me and said, hey, we're growing really rapidly. We want to do this, we want to do that, we want to go into new areas, new industries, whatever, right? And he said, we really need to make thoughtful decisions. And I said, sounds awesome. I'm all for thoughtful decisions. Have you looked at our calendars lately? There's like 5 minutes to go and take a pee. That's about all the time we get every day. You do understand that the key ingredient to thoughtful decisions is thought, right? So you got to put that on the calendar, right? You got to allow yourself time there to actually think through stuff. And so I try to anywhere between 10 and 15% of my time on the calendar is blocked out to just think. And again, the same way you can't build product in 15-minute increments, you can't really think through complex problems in 15-minute increments. So you need to make that longer periods of time to really think through stuff. And again, now you have the ability, right? You're not hustling every second of the day because you're trying to keep the lights on. You have some cash in the bank now. So now is the time to really step back a little bit and think through that really well. Again, one of my favorite quotes by Andy Grove: success breeds complacency, complacency breeds failure, only the paranoid survive, right? I think complacency is another one. It's one of those big killers of great ideas. When you raise your funds, sometimes I think that mindset slips in that I've reached the goal, right? But really, all you've done, you've reached the next mile marker. I mean, the hustle continues, right? Because if you take what you've just received as far as resources are concerned, then that will lead to more success of business, right? Which inevitably will lead to you needing more cash to get to the next stage of the business, which will need more cash to get to the next stage, right? So the hustle continues. You have to really stay on top of that and continue to think about raising money. Now, the great thing is, once you've just closed the funding round, you can talk to investors very differently than when you're in the process of raising funds. So take that time. Just go to coffee with them. Ask them all sorts of ideas. You don't need anything from them right now, right? You're not asking them for their help. You're not asking for anything. You just want to pick their brain. So you have an opportunity to kind of widen your network. You have an opportunity to really kind of dive in with people who are in that world and who see a lot of different ideas floating across their desks, right? Without having to actively ask for anything other than, do you have half an hour to have coffee or an hour to have coffee, right? So it's a great opportunity there too. Again, I think I don't know, it's just the way my brain works, I guess. But what I have learned over the years in being in the tech world is that I am really, really interested and really, really fascinated by process and structure. Okay, maybe that's just my weird German mind, but I love process and structure, right? And one of the things that I find a lot of people, especially in the startup scene, not spending enough time on is really to kind of figure out what is it that we're trying to do, how are we going to go about doing it, right? And then constantly kind of refining that, like kind of looking at it as they say it takes 10,000 hours, right, to master something, right? So kind of take 10,000 hours to master it, like really become really, really good at this, right? And so I think we oftentimes we are more interested in the chase than we are in the, we're done now. Like we've figured this out, right? We'll go into the details and really kind of figure out how stuff works. And yeah, I think it's the same here. So don't look at this as, okay, I've raised the funds. Now I can just kind of, be happy with where I'm at and just kind of let go a little bit of things, but really use that as an opportunity to now dig deeper into the things that work and are right about your business, and dig into the things that don't work yet and are not right with your business, right? And hone those skills. I think that's a really, really important thing. And again, for most businesses, this is just a mile marker, right? So you raise your first round, okay, so now you have to make your business more successful so you can raise your second round, right? And so forth. Like that's the whole idea here. Till eventually, like that's what we did at Civic Plus. We raised our initial round, we raised the follow-up round to that, and then we sold to a strategic buyer, right? So that was the final outcome for most of us. That was our finish line. Last one here is, don't be wasteful. I know that very much seems like common sense. And I know it's really, really nice to see your business account show black numbers, right? But don't just go off and throw big parties and whatever, right? I mean, there's time, and there should be part of that. Again, coming back to what I said earlier, learn how to celebrate your wins, right? So do celebrate your win. Maybe take a little bit of time off. Maybe spend a little bit of time with family, whatever it is that you need to do, right? So invest in that. But then also remember that ultimately, right, the value that you're creating is not encapsulated in that round that you just raised, right? The value of the business that you're building is so much more than just that round. And so be really cautious about how you spend your resources, right? Chances are, if you're now scaling and you're hiring more people, you will need a bigger office. But you probably don't need a bigger office in the most expensive piece of real estate in the city, right? Chances are you need to invest in marketing. Chances also are you don't need to go through an entire rebranding campaign and spend $200,000 on all sorts of whatever, right? So just kind of be cautious, because first rule is the money will always run out faster than you think it will, right? And things always cost more than you think they will, right? And so again, what you're trying to do here is conserve as much of the funding that you've raised as possible as well. Let me see here. Yeah, and again, going back to what I said earlier, I think it's really important, figure out what it is that you're trying to do instead of just throwing money at something that you haven't fully figured out yet, right? So for example, where I'm at right now, New Analytics, it's a 15-year-old startup. It shouldn't be a startup, but it acts like a startup in many ways. They have never had a marketing department until I came there last April. And so I've been doing the entrepreneur stuff of actually creating a marketing and sales organization, because the founder was the marketing guy and the sales guy and every other guy too. And so what we're doing right now, we're doing exactly what a startup would do, is we test out different channels, right? What works for us? Is social the channel that we need to use? What out of the social channels is the one that we should use? Do we go with AdWords? Do we go with print media? Do we go, right? We sell into a lot of very large organizations, right? So what works best? And again, I think that's kind of the thing, figure stuff out, experiment around. Don't just place big bets, place a lot of small bets. See what works out. Once something works out, then pour more oil on the fire, right? So, questions? Comments?
Any questions for Sascha back here in the back?
My name's Thomas Ford. I own a startup called Zant Technologies, and I was just wondering, what's your idea of when is the best time to start looking for investors?
That's a tough one. It depends on, again, it depends a little bit on where you're going for investment, right? So I will tell you that a lot of investors in the center of the country will require you to do a lot more hard work before they put money on the table, right? They want you to have product market fit figured out. Now, if you go out in the Bay Area, they're willing to invest in something that you scribbled on the back of a napkin if it just looks pretty enough, oftentimes, right? So there's just various degrees of where you can get investment from. And I think ultimately it depends on a couple of things that you need to ask yourself, right? How much am I willing to give up in order to get capital in, right? And then how much do I want to be still in charge of my business after the funding is complete, right? Because again, that will depend on at what point in the process you go out for funding. It will also depend on what kind of investor you're looking for. Hope that helps. Sure.
Next question, Shay, right up front.
For any of your funding rounds, did you do crowdfunding or have you had any experience with crowdfunding in Kansas?
I have not, unfortunately. Sorry.
Crumb. Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Right over here.
I just have a comment. I think we do a lot of thinking of how best to strategically move forward, and the fact that you said to give yourself permission to do that, I think is huge, because we're like, oh, we didn't accomplish much today, but we accomplished a lot of thought.
Yeah. What's that slow is smooth, right? Smooth is fast, right? It's like, I know I don't look like that, but I used to box for a little while. And our boxing coach always would say that, like, if you can't do it slow, you can't do it fast, right? And I think that's a really important lesson, right? You just you have to go through the motions and really figure things out before you can do it fast.
After you get your first round of funding or something, I think there's always been a battle, at least for me, between spending for growth and reaching profitability as soon as you can. What has your experience been like that? I think it's maybe dependent on your market and what you're doing, but maybe you just have any insights there.
Yeah, I think again, it ultimately depends on what's your ultimate goal down the road, right? Are you building, and this might maybe be controversial, I don't know, but are you building a business to make it self-sustainable, right? So that potentially you kind of work yourself to a point where you don't need funding. Or are you building your business in order to secure funding, in order to secure more funding, in order to, right? So what's the journey that you're ultimately on, right? And I think that's just something that every founder has to ultimately individually decide for him or herself. And I think a lot of it has also to do with the market dynamics that you're positioned into, right? So if you're in a market where you don't have a lot of natural competitors and you have a great opportunity to really grab some significant market share, then yeah, I would probably double down on, grow my teams pretty aggressively, and I kind of go really heavily into that. If you're in a more crowded market where it's more about differentiation, right, and it's more about really kind of nailing those details, what you might want to do is just kind of step back a little bit and kind of get to profitability, which will then allow you to fund some of those, explorations and some of that research internally. So, yeah.
If you could describe the universe of private equity, venture capital, in categorizing
what would you say the percentage is of venture capitalists that have the, 3 years maximum, they're in, they're out, and they want a 30%, we're looking for a major return. And do most venture capitalists expect you to sell the entity or go public or something within that period in order for them to realize that, versus, is venture capital even feasible for someone that really wants to take this, grow incrementally, organically, and be self-sustaining and have a 10, 20-year vision?
Yeah, I mean, I think the vast majority of exits, right, are VC to VC, right? They're not VC to strategic buyer. So that's the first thing. So most of the time when companies change hands, right, from an investment perspective, you're actually not selling to a larger entity that you now become part of. You like sell to the next bigger fish in the pond, basically, right? So that's generally what happens. If you're looking to really grow your business more incrementally and you're trying to get it to the point where it's self-sustaining, right? In the sense that you fund everything that you want to do internally, right, organically versus externally, then you might want to look at something like growth equity, right, or other vehicles that you can utilize there instead of going with a true venture firm, right? Most of the time, the venture firms have a very short horizon. Now, there are exceptions, right? So one of the reasons why at Permata we ended up with Volition Capital out of Boston is because they're a small boutique firm and they have a history of holding on to things 7, 8, 9 years, right? And really investing in the teams and really allowing the teams to grow. And that was important to us, right? But those are few and far between. Thank you.
All right, everybody, give it up one more time for Sascha Ohler, please.
Thank you.
Yeah. I've had the great opportunity to hear Sascha speak a couple times, and it's always, I'm just taking notes as fast as I can. I saw him walk in with Reverie today, and this is a small token of our appreciation. Reverie's made a startup week blend for
That's
you.
Awesome.
So everybody stick around. We have 2 o'clock. Jason Cox is going to be talking about disruption on the inside. So it's certainly relevant for any business owner or person in the professional community right now. So stick around for our 2 o'clock. Thank you.